In the dusty heart of Texas, where legends are born and broken in 8 seconds, there exists a story that has haunted the rodeo circuit for 20 years. It's a tale of courage, redemption, and the unbreakable bond between father and son. Jake Morrison was just 7 years old when he watched his father, the legendary bull rider Tom Morrison, face a beast known only as Devil's Backbone, a 2,000-pound monster with horns like daggers and a reputation for ending careers. That fateful night, everything changed. Tom's spine was shattered, his dreams crushed beneath the hooves of a creature that seemed possessed by pure fury. Now, 2 decades later, Jake stands at the gates of destiny, preparing to mount the same bull that destroyed his father's life. But what drives a man to face his family's greatest nightmare? What secrets lie buried in the dust of that tragic night? And what will Jake discover when he finally locks eyes with the beast that changed everything? This is a story about facing your demons, honoring your legacy, and finding the courage to write your own ending. Jake Morrison grew up in the shadow of greatness and tragedy. His earliest memories were filled with the scent of leather, the thunder of hooves, and the roar of crowds chanting his father's name. Tom Morrison had been a titan in the professional bull riding circuit, a man who seemed to dance with danger every time he climbed onto the back of a bucking beast. His trophy room was filled with championship buckles, his name etched into the halls of rodeo fame. But all of that existed in a time before Devil's Backbone, before the night that turned their lives into a cautionary tale whispered around campfires and locker rooms across the country. Jake remembered that night with crystal and clarity, even though part of him wished he could forget. The Houston Rodeo, spring of 2005. The arena was packed with 15,000 screaming fans, all waiting to see if Tom Morrison could conquer the most dangerous bull in the sport's history. Devil's Backbone had thrown 47 riders in a row, each one lasting less than 6 seconds. The massive black bull with the distinctive white stripe down its spine had become legendary, not just for being unrideable, but for the injuries it inflicted. 3 broken arms, 2 shattered legs, and countless concussions marked its record. But Tom Morrison never backed down from a challenge. Jake sat in the front row with his mother, Sarah, clutching a foam finger that read, "Number 1 Dad." He watched his father climb onto the platform above the chute, watched him settle onto the bull's massive back, wrapping the rope around his gloved hand with practiced precision. Even from his seat, Jake could see the concentration on his father's face, the way his jaw set with determination. Tom nodded, the gate swung open, and Devil's Backbone exploded into the arena like a force of nature. For 5 seconds, it was poetry. Tom moved with the bull, anticipating every twist and buck, his free arm extended for balance, his body flowing with the violent rhythm beneath him. The crowd rose to their feet, sensing history in the making. But at the 6-second mark, Devil's Backbone did something unexpected. The bull spun left, then immediately reversed direction with such force that Tom's body whipped like a rag doll. His hand tangled in the rope, preventing him from being thrown clear. The bull continued its vicious spin, and Tom's body slammed against the animal's side again and again. When his hand finally came free, he was thrown 15 feet through the air, landing on his back with a sickening thud that Jake could hear even over the gasps of the crowd. The bull wasn't finished. In what seemed like deliberate malice, Devil's Backbone charged the fallen rider. The bullfighters rushed in, waving their arms and shouting, but the massive animal had locked onto its target. One hoof came down on Tom's lower back before the clowns finally managed to redirect the beast away. Jake watched in horror as his father lay motionless in the dirt, watched as the medical team rushed in with a stretcher, watched as his mother's hand squeezed his so tightly he thought his fingers might break. The diagnosis came later that night at the hospital. 3 crushed vertebrae, severe spinal cord damage, and a 20% chance of ever walking again. Tom Morrison never competed again. He spent 2 years in physical therapy, learning to walk with a cane, fighting through pain that would have broken lesser men. He opened a small ranch outside of Austin, teaching young riders the basics of bull riding, but the spark in his eyes had dimmed. He never spoke about that night, never mentioned Devil's Backbone's name, never watched rodeo on television. It was as if part of his soul had died in that Houston arena, trampled beneath the hooves of a demon wearing hide and horns. Jake grew up determined to finish what his father had started. He began riding at age 12, despite his mother's tears and protestations. Tom tried to discourage him at first, but eventually recognized the same fire that had once burned in his own chest. He became Jake's coach, teaching him everything he knew, preparing him for a career in the sport that had given Tom everything and taken it all away. By age 27, Jake had become one of the top riders in the circuit, earning respect and championships of his own. But there was always an unspoken goal, a shadow that followed him: Devil's Backbone. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning in late September. Jake was in his kitchen, preparing breakfast before a training session, when his manager's voice crackled through the speaker with news that made his blood run cold. Devil's Backbone was coming out of retirement. The now legendary bull, 22 years old and supposedly retired to a breeding program, was being brought back for one final exhibition ride at the Texas State Championship. The stock contractor, Marcus Webb, had decided to give one lucky rider the chance to be the first person ever to successfully ride the undefeated beast. The catch? Riders had to apply, and only one would be chosen based on their record and their story. Jake's hand trembled as he set down his coffee cup. 20 years. For 20 years, he had imagined this moment, played it out in his mind 1,000 different ways. He had watched every available video of Devil's Backbone's rides, studying the bull's patterns, memorizing its favorite moves. He knew that the animal typically spun left out of the gate, that it loved to kick high on the third buck, that it had a devastating reverse spin that had unseated countless riders. He had trained specifically for this bull, even though he had never admitted it to anyone, not even himself. But when he drove out to his father's ranch that afternoon to discuss the opportunity, he was met with a reaction he hadn't anticipated. Tom Morrison's face went pale when Jake told him about the exhibition. The older man, now 52, and walking with only a slight limp after years of therapy, set down the rope he had been mending and stared at his son with an expression that mixed fear, anger, and something else, something that looked almost like shame. Tom told Jake to forget it. The Devil's Backbone wasn't worth the risk, that some challenges weren't meant to be answered. But Jake pressed, asking the question that had haunted him since childhood. Why? Why did his father, who had faced every challenge in his career without hesitation, want his son to walk away from this one? Why did he never talk about that night? What really happened in those 8 seconds that changed everything? Tom walked away without answering, disappearing into the barn where he kept his old equipment. Jake followed, finding his father standing in front of a locked chest that Jake had never been allowed to open. With shaking hands, Tom pulled out a key from his pocket and unlocked it. Inside were his old riding gloves, his rope, his championship buckles, and a folder filled with documents and photographs. Tom pulled out a series of pictures, all showing Devil's Backbone at various ages, and spread them on a workbench. "That bull is smart," Tom finally said, his voice rough with emotion. "Smarter than any animal I've ever encountered. It doesn't just want to throw you. It studies you, learns your patterns, waits for the perfect moment to destroy you. But that's not why I'm asking you to walk away." He pulled out another photograph, this one showing a younger Marcus Webb standing next to Devil's Backbone. 3 months before my ride, Webb came to me with a proposition. He said he would pay me $50,000 to stay on that bull for 8 seconds. He said the publicity would be worth millions, that sponsorships would pour in for both of us. I turned him down. I told him I rode for the sport, not for show business. Tom's hands gripped the edge of the workbench. The night of my ride, something was wrong. Devil's Backbone was more aggressive than usual, more violent. The bullfighters told me later that Webb had kept the bull in isolation for 3 days before the event. No food except minimal amounts, keeping it agitated and angry. He wanted to ensure that if someone did ride it, it would be spectacular. And if someone got hurt, well, that was just part of the game. I tried to file a complaint after my injury, but I had no proof. Webb's operation was too clean, too professional. All I had was suspicion and a broken body. Jake felt his worldview shifting. You think he deliberately made the bull more dangerous? That your injury was because he wanted a bigger show? Tom nodded slowly. I can't prove it, and I've never spoken publicly about it because I have no evidence. But yes, I believe Webb crossed a line that night. And now he's doing it again, bringing back a 22-year-old bull that should be living out its days in peace. He's using your story, our story, to create drama and sell tickets. And I won't let you be part of his circus. But something in Jake resisted. He had spent his entire adult life preparing for this moment. He had become one of the best riders in the world. And now he was being asked to walk away from the ultimate challenge because of suspicions and fear. He looked at his father and saw not the titan of his childhood memories, but a man still haunted by trauma, still seeking answers to questions that might never be resolved. Jake made a decision that would change everything. He told his father he was going to apply for the exhibition ride, and that he was going to win. The announcement came 2 weeks later. Jake Morrison had been selected as the rider who would face Devil's Backbone in the exhibition. The news exploded across rodeo media and beyond, with sports networks picking up the human interest angle of the son facing his father's nemesis. Marcus Webb milked the publicity for everything it was worth, giving interviews about redemption and legacy, painting the event as a historic moment in rodeo history. Ticket sales for the Texas State Championship skyrocketed, with the exhibition ride scheduled as the finale of the evening. Tom Morrison stopped speaking to his son. Sarah begged Jake to reconsider, reminding him of the years of pain and rehabilitation she had watched her husband endure. But Jake was resolute, driven by something deeper than revenge or glory. He needed to prove, if only to himself, that the Morrison name meant more than tragedy and defeat. He intensified his training, working with sports psychologists to prepare mentally for the ride, studying every frame of available footage of Devil's Backbone, visualizing success over and over. 3 days before the event, Jake received an unexpected visit at his training facility. An old man with weathered features and kind eyes introduced himself as Raymond Torres, a former stock contractor who had worked with Marcus Webb decades ago. Raymond had seen the news coverage and felt compelled to share something that had weighed on his conscience for 20 years. He told Jake that he had been present the night of Tom Morrison's ride, that he had helped Webb prepare Devil's Backbone, and that he had witnessed something that still haunted him. Raymond explained that Webb had done more than just isolate and agitate the bull. He had used a technique called loading, where small irritants were applied to the bull's sensitive areas to ensure maximum aggression when released. It wasn't technically illegal at the time, though it existed in an ethical gray area that most reputable contractors avoided. But Webb had been desperate for a spectacular performance, and Devil's Backbone had delivered exactly what he wanted, a violent, career-ending disaster that generated headlines and controversy for months. The publicity had launched Webb's operation into the top tier of stock contractors, making him wealthy and influential. I quit working for him after that night, Raymond said, his voice heavy with regret. I couldn't be part of that anymore. But I never spoke up because I didn't want to destroy my own reputation in the industry. I convinced myself that it was just rodeo, that injuries happen, that Tom knew the risks. But watching you prepare to face that same animal, knowing what I know, I couldn't stay silent anymore. That bull isn't just dangerous because it's talented. It's dangerous because it was taught to hate riders. taught that violence was the only option. Jake felt a cold rage building in his chest. "Does my father know this? Did you ever tell him?" Raymond shook his head. "I tried to reach out once, about 5 years ago, but he wouldn't return my calls. I think he suspected what happened, but didn't want confirmation. Sometimes not knowing is easier than facing the truth." Jake now faced an impossible choice. He could expose Webb publicly, potentially destroying the man's career and reputation, but also casting doubt on the legitimacy of his own upcoming ride. People would say he was making excuses in advance, that he was scared and looking for a way out. Or he could proceed with the ride, knowing that he was participating in a system that had deliberately harmed his father, all while the man responsible profited from the spectacle. There was a third option, one that began forming in Jake's mind as he listened to Raymond's confession. He could use the ride itself to expose the truth. Jake asked Raymond if he would be willing to testify publicly about what he had witnessed. The old man hesitated, clearly torn between wanting to do the right thing and protecting what remained of his reputation. Finally, he agreed, but only if Jake could provide corroborating evidence. "Webb keeps meticulous records," Raymond said. "He has files on every bull, every ride, every technique he's ever used. If you could get access to those records, we might have enough to prove what really happened." The next 48 hours became a race against time. Jake reached out to contacts within the rodeo community, looking for anyone who might have information about Webb's operations or access to his records. He discovered that 2 former employees had left Webb's organization under contentious circumstances in recent years, both signing non-disclosure agreements, but both harboring resentments about how they had been treated. Through careful negotiation and promises of legal protection, Jake convinced one of them to share digital copies of files she had saved before her departure insurance. She called it, in case Webb ever tried to destroy her reputation. The files were damning. They documented years of questionable practices, including detailed notes on the preparation of specific bulls for high-profile events. And there, buried in a folder marked Houston 2005, were records of Devil's Backbone's treatment in the days leading up to Tom Morrison's ride. The notes described isolation protocols, feeding schedules designed to increase aggression, and references to sensitivity enhancement that matched Raymond's description of loading techniques. Webb had meticulously documented his own crimes, apparently confident that his records would never see the light of day. Jake now possessed the power to destroy Marcus Webb and vindicate his father's suspicions. But he also recognized that releasing this information before the exhibition would rob him of the opportunity to ride Devil's Backbone, to face the challenge that had defined his entire career. He made a decision that surprised even himself. He would ride first and expose the truth afterward. Not because he wanted to protect Webb, but because he needed to know, once and for all, if he could conquer the beast on its own terms, regardless of what had happened in the past. The Texas State Championship arrived with the weight of expectation and history. Jake drove to the Fort Worth Arena alone, having asked his family to watch from home despite their protests. His mother had cried, saying she couldn't bear to watch another Morrison man risk everything on the back of a bull. Tom had simply looked at him with an expression Jake couldn't read, part pride, part fear, part resignation. They hadn't truly reconciled since Jake's decision to accept the exhibition, and that unresolved tension added another layer of complexity to everything Jake was feeling. In the locker room, Jake went through his pre-ride routine with mechanical precision. He stretched, taped his riding hand, checked and rechecked his equipment. Other riders offered words of encouragement, though Jake could see the doubt in their eyes. Everyone knew Devil's Backbone's record. 73 attempts over its career, 0 successful rides. At 22 years old, the bull was past its physical prime, but age had apparently done nothing to diminish its skill or determination. If anything, experience had made it more dangerous, more calculated in its movements. Marcus Webb found Jake an hour before the exhibition. The stock contractor was all smiles and confidence, dressed in his expensive Western wear, radiating the satisfaction of a man who had orchestrated the perfect publicity event. He thanked Jake for being part of what he called a historic moment in rodeo, praised his courage, and wished him luck with a handshake that felt slimy and false. Jake looked at the man who had destroyed his father's career for profit and publicity, and he felt a calm resolve settle over him. Whatever happened in the arena, Webb's reckoning was coming. As the evening's competition progressed, Jake watched from behind the chutes, studying the bulls, observing how the riders approached their challenges. The regular events were excellent, with several riders posting impressive scores, but everyone knew the real show was yet to come. The arena announcer periodically reminded the crowd of what was coming. The legendary Devil's Backbone, undefeated in 73 attempts, facing Jake Morrison, son of the great Tom Morrison, in a battle 20 years in the making. The narrative was perfect, the drama manufactured to perfection. Webb had created a spectacle that transcended sport and entered the realm of mythology. Finally, the moment arrived. The arena lights dimmed, and a spotlight focused on the chute where Devil's Backbone waited. Jake climbed up onto the platform, and for the first time, he looked directly at the animal that had haunted his family for 2 decades. The bull was enormous, easily 2,000 pounds of muscle and bone, with intelligent dark eyes that seemed to assess Jake with an almost human awareness. The distinctive white stripe down its spine stood out against the black hide, giving the animal an otherworldly appearance. Devil's Backbone shifted in the chute, and Jake could feel the power radiating from it, the barely contained violence waiting to explode. Jake lowered himself onto the bull's back, and the animal tensed beneath him. He wrapped the rope around his gloved hand, working the rosin into the glove for maximum grip. He could feel Devil's Backbone's breathing, steady and powerful, could sense the creature's readiness. As he settled into position, Jake made a decision that surprised him. He let go of his anger. He released his resentment toward Webb, his frustration with his father's silence, his fear of failure. In that moment, sitting on the back of the most dangerous bull in rodeo history, Jake found a strange kind of peace. This wasn't about revenge or redemption. This was about the pure challenge of man versus beast, skill versus power, determination versus instinct. The arena fell silent. Jake could hear his own heartbeat, steady and strong. He looked up at the rafters, took a deep breath, and nodded. The gate swung open, and Devil's Backbone launched into the arena with explosive force. Jake's training and instincts took over. The bull spun left, just as he had anticipated, and Jake moved with it, his free arm extended, his core engaged. At the 2-second mark, Devil's Backbone kicked high and twisted, trying to throw Jake forward over its head. Jake leaned back, absorbing the force, staying centered. 3 seconds. 4 seconds. The bull reversed direction with tremendous speed, and Jake felt the powerful jolt but maintained his position. 5 seconds. At 6 seconds, the exact moment when his father had been thrown 20 years earlier, Devil's Backbone executed its signature move, a violent left spin immediately followed by a right reversal. Jake had studied this exact sequence hundreds of times in videos. He anticipated the spin, shifted his weight fractionally early, and when the reversal came, he was ready. His hand held firm in the rope, his legs gripped tight, and he stayed on top of the maelstrom beneath him. 7 seconds. The crowd's roar became deafening. Jake could feel Devil's Backbone's frustration, could sense the bull trying different tactics, searching for the move that would unseat this persistent rider. 8 seconds. The buzzer sounded, and the arena erupted. Jake released his hand from the rope and pushed away from the bull, landing on his feet in the dirt and immediately running toward the fence. Behind him, Devil's Backbone kicked and spun, almost seeming confused that the rider had successfully completed the ride. Jake climbed the fence and turned to look at the bull one final time. Their eyes met across the arena, and Jake felt an unexpected emotion: gratitude. This magnificent creature had given him and his father the greatest challenges of their lives. What Webb had done with the animal was exploitation and abuse, but the bull itself was simply following its nature, perfected by genetics and experience. The arena descended into chaos. The score flashed on the Jumbotron: 96.5 points, one of the highest scores in professional rodeo history. Jake Morrison had not only ridden Devil's Backbone, he had ridden it spectacularly. The crowd chanted his name, reporters rushed the arena floor, and fellow competitors mobbed him with congratulations. Marcus Webb pushed through the crowd, his face flushed with excitement, already calculating the financial windfall this historic ride would generate. He grabbed Jake's hand and raised it in the air, positioning himself in every camera shot, ensuring that his brand and his bull shared equally in the glory. But Jake wasn't celebrating. Even as people surrounded him, slapping his back and shouting congratulations, his mind was already moving to what came next. He had proven he could ride Devil's Backbone. He had conquered the challenge that had defined his life. Now it was time for the truth. He pulled away from the crowd and walked toward the media area, where a press conference had been hastily organized to capitalize on the historic moment. Jake took his seat at the table, flanked by Marcus Webb and rodeo officials. The questions came rapid fire. How did it feel? What was going through his mind? Had he dedicated the ride to his father? Jake answered mechanically, providing the sound bites everyone expected. But then he asked if he could make a statement before taking more questions. Webb, sensing an opportunity for more drama, eagerly agreed. Jake pulled out his phone and connected it to the presentation screen behind them. He displayed copies of the documents he had obtained, Webb's own records detailing the preparation of Devil's Backbone for Tom Morrison's ride 20 years earlier. The arena fell silent as Jake explained what the documents revealed: the isolation, the aggressive feeding protocols, the enhancement techniques designed to maximize violence. He described how Webb had deliberately pushed an already dangerous animal into a state of heightened aggression for the sake of publicity and profit. Marcus Webb's face transformed from confusion to horror to rage as Jake spoke. He tried to interrupt, to discredit the documents, but Jake continued relentlessly. He introduced Raymond Torres, who had been waiting in the wings, and the elderly former contractor confirmed everything Jake had said. Raymond provided additional details about Webb's operations over the years, describing a pattern of prioritizing spectacle over safety, of viewing bulls as machines to be manipulated rather than animals to be respected. The revelation sent shockwaves through the arena and the rodeo community. Webb attempted to defend himself, claiming the documents were fabricated, that Raymond was a disgruntled former employee with an axe to grind. But the evidence was too detailed, too specific, too clearly in Webb's own handwriting and filing systems. Rodeo officials immediately called for an investigation, and several major sponsors announced they were suspending their relationships with Webb's operation pending the outcome. But Jake wasn't finished. In a move that surprised everyone, including himself, he announced that he was donating his entire prize money from the ride to a fund for injured rodeo athletes, specifically those who had been hurt riding bulls from Webb's stock. He called for industry-wide reforms in how bulls were prepared for competition, advocating for stricter oversight and harsher penalties for contractors who prioritized entertainment over animal welfare and rider safety. He acknowledged that rodeo would always be dangerous, that bulls and horses would always be powerful and unpredictable, but argued that humans had a responsibility not to artificially amplify those dangers for profit. The press conference dissolved into pandemonium. Reporters shouted questions, officials huddled in emergency discussions, and Webb was escorted from the arena by security as angry fans hurled insults and accusations. Jake sat at the table, exhausted and emotionally drained, wondering if he had done the right thing. He had just blown up his own historic achievement, transforming what should have been a celebration into a scandal. His ride would forever be associated with controversy rather than triumph. His phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was his father. Jake's hand trembled as he answered, expecting anger or disappointment. Instead, he heard Tom Morrison's voice, thick with emotion. "You did good, son. You did real good. Come home." Those simple words meant more to Jake than all the accolades and congratulations combined. He had set out to conquer Devil's Backbone and honor his father's legacy. He had ended up doing something more important. He had told the truth, regardless of the personal cost. Jake left the arena through a back entrance, avoiding the media circus. As he walked to his truck in the parking lot, he passed the livestock pens where the bulls were kept. Devil's Backbone stood in its pen, calmly eating hay, seemingly unbothered by the controversy swirling around it. Jake approached the fence and looked at the magnificent animal one final time. "You deserved better," he said quietly. "You all deserve better." The bull glanced up at him briefly, then returned to its meal, and Jake felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with scores or records. The drive back to Austin took 3 hours, giving Jake time to process everything that had happened. His phone was flooded with messages, some congratulatory, some angry, some supportive of his revelations about Webb. Social media was ablaze with debate about his actions. Had he disrespected the sport by airing its dirty laundry? Or had he shown courage by speaking truth to power? Jake turned off his phone, not ready to engage with the court of public opinion. When Jake arrived at his parents' ranch, he found both Tom and Sarah waiting on the porch. His mother rushed to embrace him, tears streaming down her face, alternating between relief that he was unhurt and pride in what he had done. Tom stood back, leaning on his cane, but his eyes were bright with emotion. Father and son looked at each other for a long moment, 20 years of unspoken words hanging between them, before Tom opened his arms and pulled Jake into a fierce hug. They sat on the porch late into the night, talking about everything they had avoided discussing for 2 decades. Tom admitted that he had always suspected Webb's involvement in his injury, but had been too proud and too afraid to investigate. He had convinced himself that it was just bad luck, that dwelling on suspicions would only make him bitter. By staying silent, he thought he was protecting Jake from the darker side of the sport. Instead, he realized his silence had only created mystery and obsession. Jake talked about his own journey, about how the shadow of that night had driven every decision in his life. He confessed that he had been motivated less by love of rodeo and more by a need to somehow fix what had been broken, to rewrite history. Riding Devil's Backbone successfully hadn't brought him the satisfaction he had expected. It was the act of exposing the truth, of ensuring that other riders might be safer in the future, that gave him a sense of purpose and peace. In the days that followed, the rodeo world underwent a reckoning. Marcus Webb's operation was suspended pending a full investigation by the Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association. Additional former employees came forward with their own stories of questionable practices. Webb himself hired lawyers and fought back, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. Within 3 months, he had sold his stock contracting business and retired from the sport in disgrace. The bulls under his care, including Devil's Backbone, were dispersed to other contractors who had committed to following stricter ethical guidelines. Devil's Backbone was retired permanently to a sanctuary for former rodeo animals, where it lived out its remaining years in comfort. Jake visited the bulls several times, bringing carrots and apples, sitting on the fence and watching the magnificent creature graze peacefully. There was something healing about seeing the animal freed from the pressure of performance, allowed simply to exist without being manipulated or exploited. The bull that had seemed so demonic in the arena was, in retirement, surprisingly gentle and curious. Jake's historic ride became a turning point for the sport. While some traditionalists accused him of betraying rodeo's code of silence, Younger riders embraced him as a hero who had prioritized ethics over glory. The Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association implemented new regulations governing bull preparation and treatment, with independent oversight to ensure compliance. A foundation was established in Tom Morrison's name to support injured riders and promote animal welfare in Western sports. As for Jake himself, he continued competing for 2 more years, winning another championship before retiring at age 30. He joined his father in running the ranch, which they expanded into a premier training facility for young riders. But unlike traditional rodeo schools, their program emphasized not just technique and courage, but also ethics and responsibility. They taught their students that true strength came not from dominating animals or taking unnecessary risks, but from understanding the partnership between human and beast, respecting the power of the creatures they rode. Tom Morrison's mobility continued to improve with age and therapy. While he would never ride again, he found fulfillment in coaching and mentoring, passing on not just his technical knowledge, but also the wisdom gained from his experiences. The bitterness that had clouded his features for so many years gradually faded, replaced by contentment and purpose. He often said that while Devil's Backbone had taken his career, the truth about that night had given him something more valuable, the chance to help build a better sport for future generations. The story of Jake Morrison's ride became legendary in rodeo circles, but for reasons that evolved over time. It was remembered not just as the moment someone finally rode the unbeatable Devil's Backbone, but as the moment when a young man chose integrity over glory, when truth prevailed over spectacle. Parents told their children about Jake not to glorify risk-taking, but to illustrate the importance of doing what's right, even when it's difficult, even when it costs you something valuable. Years later, at a Rodeo Hall of Fame ceremony where both Tom and Jake were being honored for their contributions to the sport as safety reforms, a young reporter asked Jake if he regretted how things had unfolded that night in Fort Worth. Did he wish he could have just enjoyed his historic ride without the controversy? Jake thought about it for a moment, then shook his head. That ride lasted 8 seconds, he said. The reforms we helped create will protect riders for generations. There's no comparison in terms of what matters. He paused, then added with a slight smile. Besides, I got what I really needed from that night. I got my dad back. The Morrison Ranch stands today as a testament to the idea that redemption doesn't always look like we expect. Sometimes it's not about conquering demons or rewriting painful histories. Sometimes it's about facing the truth, accepting what cannot be changed, and building something better from the lessons learned. The old trophy room in the ranch house now serves a different purpose. Instead of displaying championship buckles and ribbons, it houses records of safety improvements, letters from grateful families, and photographs of young riders trained in methods that honor both human courage and animal dignity. Devil's Backbone died peacefully at age 26, having lived longer than most bulls of its size and athletic intensity. When Jake received the news, he drove out to the sanctuary and stood at the fence where the great bull had spent its final years. He thought about all the lives that had been changed by that creature, his father's, his own, Webb's, and countless others. In the end, the bull had been neither devil nor villain, just a magnificent animal caught up in human ambition and exploitation. Its true legacy wasn't the riders it threw or the injuries it caused, but the reforms its story helped inspire. That, Jake thought, was a fitting epitaph for a creature that had been so much more than its fearsome reputation suggested. He placed a hand on the fence post and whispered, "Thank you," to the memory of a worthy adversary who had taught him more about himself than he ever expected to learn.